DC voters, I'm Lisa Rice, native Washingtonian, proposer of Ballot Initiative 83. Let's make politicians work harder with 2 changes to our system. 1, let independents like me vote in taxpayer-funded primary elections. And 2, implement ranked choice voting to vote for your favorite candidate and rank your backup choices. Candidates need over 50% to win. Flip your ballot and vote yes on 83. Paid for by Make All Votes Count DC, Philip Pinnell, Treasurer.
Today on CityCast DC, buckle in for our 3rd Love is Blind DC recap. Episodes 10 and 11 dropped on Netflix last week, and oh boy, it gets wild. Turns out one of the most beloved men on the show has kids he didn't disclose, and multiple couples break up before they even get to their weddings. Asia Drain is back to chat through the drama with me. Needless to say, there are huge spoilers ahead. Today is Monday, October 21st. I'm Senior Executive Producer Priyanka Tilve, and here's what DC is talking about. Good Monday morning, CityCast DC listeners. We'll get to our Love is Blind recap in a moment, but first, today is a big day. We're kicking off our fall member campaign. If you're new here, or even if you're a longtime listener, you might not know that CityCast DC is supported in part by memberships. It's true that our daily podcast and newsletter are completely free for anyone in our community, but that's only possible with member support. So all week, we're asking you to consider becoming a member to support our daily CityCast DC podcast and the Hey DC newsletter that you know and love. If we've ever helped you understand a local issue, hosted a guest you loved hearing from, or introduced you to the best of what's happening around town, now is the time to show your support. I've been so touched to meet people at our live tapings and other public events who tell us the many ways that CityCast DC has helped them out. One woman recently emailed us that she moved to the city a few months ago, and our Hey DC newsletter has made her feel at home here. The last time we tabled at Art All Night in Mount Pleasant, a lifelong Washingtonian said she was grateful that our podcast covers local issues that often get overlooked in this city that can be so nationally focused. Hearing stories like this really brighten my day. And it doesn't hurt that in the course of a week, I get to both interview public officials like the mayor and watch Love is Blind. For research. So again, joining our member community is the best way to support our daily podcast. With your small monthly contribution, we get to stick around for years to come. And anyone who signs up gets access to our podcast ad-free. Just visit membership.citycast.fm to become a member today. That's membership.citycast.fm. Okay, now on to today's very juicy episode about the DC-ness and the drama of Love is Blind DC episodes 7 to 11. Asia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, oh my God. I've been very excited to chat with you. For people who are kind of just jumping into the deep end here, could you just give a really short breakdown of what the Love is Blind framework is and then what section of the show we're covering today?
For sure. So the TLDR, too long didn't read version of Love is Blind is that it's Love is Blind. And so you have a bunch of couples starting with 3 weeks in pods and they're talking to each other without being able to see each other. So the audience can see them, but they can't see each other. And ultimately, in order to get out of the pods, they have to decide to get engaged and go through with getting married. And so the first half of the season was them in the pods and then them going on a pre-honeymoon, since they're engaged, not married yet, where they go to Mexico and start to bond. They get to see each other in person now that they're engaged. And now we're in the phase of the show where they're back in DC, back dealing with the real world and seeing that is love blind and is reality blind too, I guess.
I love that. It's reality blind. Also, yeah. We say they're back in DC, but let's be real. Are they back in DC?
So many of them. So, okay, we've got some transplants. We've got one person from Baltimore. We've got a lot of Virginians. So it's really effectively the DMV plus Baltimore and San Diego.
Yeah, and when they put them up in a hotel or apartment situation, it's not even DC, it's Arlington. They put them up in the Rixie, which is Ballston, I think?
Yes, which I think might be a commentary on DC's housing problem, potentially. So maybe,
Yes.
which
Ooh, that is the
don't even
most
get
CityCast
started.
DC thing you could have said.
Exactly. Which, you know what? Don't even get me started on Virginia's housing problem.
Fair.
So, but weirdly enough, I feel like with the people that they selected for the show, I was like, no, that demographic and location weirdly makes sense in my head, which is
Yeah.
like they're either maybe in Northwest or like more accurately for the budget of this show, they said, let's go to Arlington,
Let's
which
go to
isn't that
Arlington.
much better, I'll say.
Yeah. They did seem to fit that vibe. Generally, like the location cameos that popped through. I mean, I will say it did feel really nice seeing all the establishing shots of DC, even if it was like mostly the Washington Monument or
Right.
other memorials. Like it was very capital W Washington that they showcased. It still felt good to me. Like
Yeah.
the few times you see like a shot of like Logan Circle or DuPont Circle, like it warms the soul, you know?
I was clapping my hands when I saw Noma.
Yeah.
I was just like, Northeast, yes. Get her in there. Get her in there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Speaking of, I was very impressed that they went to some restaurants that, like, I don't think a lot of people talk about or know about. Like, what it's called Vera, right? The Lebanese Mexican spot where Marissa and Ramses meet Marissa's family.
Yes, 100%. I was actually like really impressed with like not even just the restaurants, but the date spots they chose in general too. Like I was like looking up the list and I was like familiar with like, Seal Social Club. Tupelo Honey is technically in Virginia. So I was like, of course
That's
I know
okay.
that
We'll
one.
count it.
But we'll count it. It's Nova. It's near Courthouse. But I was like Planter where Monica and Steven
I clapped at that. I love Planter so much and Adams Morgan.
It's like been on my list forever. And I'm just like, okay, well, now that it's been on the show, everybody and their grandmother is going to be there. But I will also be there with my grandmother because it's just such a lovely place. And so
it is the cutest store. It's so green. Like you walk into that place and you just feel like you're in a little urban forest. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, I was very proud of the date spots chosen. So like shout out to the producers on that one. I'll give a point for that.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot to be embarrassed about for DC with this show, and at least the location cameos can give us something to be proud of.
Yes, 100%. I mean, I think one of my other highlights too was the hot tub on the Potomac.
Yeah.
Because I also feel like in the most recent episode, for context, Marissa and Ramses like are having actually a very hot discussion in a hot tub on a boat in the Potomac. And this summer was actually the first summer I ever got to like be on like a boat going across the Potomac. And if you live in the city and haven't done that yet, like I feel like DC isn't thought of like a seaside place, but like the Potomac is a beautiful place to be. And you can get views of the city that you wouldn't get anywhere else. So I appreciated the producers for that too.
Should we get into some of the drama?
Please, let's.
Okay, well, we've talked about Marissa and Ramses a few times, so maybe we should start there. So when we last talked about them, when you were chatting with Bridget and Chelsea on our last recap episode, Marissa and Ramses seemed strong.
Yes,
like they seemed
strong.
Like one of our few strong couples. Mm-hmm. What the heck happened?
Night and day.
Truly.
Like night and day. Like, I mean, there's in the honeymoon, just like honeymooning, for lack of a better word.
They were very all over each other.
Oh, yes. Like, even like when they were in groups together, like Ramses could not have his hands off of her. Like, they were just like together, joined at the hip. The chemistry was very clearly there. I think like also getting a sense of their personalities in the pods. I get why. Like, Marissa's very bubbly. Ramses, I think, like receives that very well. And I think that's probably what he was attracted to. But once they get back to DC, like, and for context, I think I mentioned this before, but Marissa is like one of the contestants that lives in Baltimore. And so now they haven't even located her in DC in the apartments. They put her all the way in Ballston. So now she has to commute from Ballston all the way to Baltimore. It sounds like every day. So it doesn't sound like she has a hybrid work environment. And Ramses like works from home, which like also is exhausting like in its own right. But it puts a very extra strain on their relationship that I don't think, well, it sounds like I don't think Ramses especially was expecting. And so now as it's getting closer and closer to the wedding, he's having conversations about potential issues with their physical intimacy that weren't the same at their honeymoon. Or, Marissa doesn't want to be touched sometimes. Marissa talks about like feeling sick because she has PMS and like a vitamin D deficiency.
Right.
And so she kind of wants space from that. But Ramses is like taking that as a sign that like there's something wrong. And he's like, but I want more physical touch and like XYZ. And so I'm worried about that in the long term. But I think it just throws me off because I just feel like their lifestyles might be too different that they weren't expecting, that you just couldn't get in the pods.
Yeah. Which, I mean, Chelsea called it in our last recap episode that you knew we come back to the real life. All of a sudden, they have to go and do their jobs or go to grad school. And love is not blind enough for that.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And can we talk about like the way that Ramses responded to all of the concerns that Marissa had about physical touch and, their sex life and birth control? Like, I was just very disappointed with his lack of sensitivity.
Yes, I was shocked. Also because like, I feel like he's just like, healthy masculinity. Like, I understand women. I want to be supportive. And the second she says PMS, he's like, but physical stuff is important too. And it's just like, okay, but like.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, it's important for him to express his needs as well.
Right.
And I'm not saying that he can't express that physical touch is important to him. But if she's saying that she's feeling sick right now, for him to be grumpy about that is just, again, very disappointing. And then the other conversation that they had about physical touch was about condoms, and he was saying he doesn't want to use them. And she's like, well, I don't want to go back on birth control because it's been a bad experience for me. And dudes out here like, oh, well, maybe we should just risk pregnancy.
Yeah.
What?
There was a hot second, which, again, spoiler alert, like right before the wedding, before the next episode's in episode 11 at the end, there's like a really dramatic moment between them. I swear to God, I thought Marissa was pregnant. Like,
that would be a plot twist.
Yes, I thought for a second that Marissa may have been pregnant, and like, thankfully that wasn't the case. And for Ramses, like, I understand like his desire, because also they're getting married very quickly, to like wait to have children. But also like Marissa's in her 30s, and I think she is very aware like of her body, and like I think is actively communicating like, there's only a certain amount of time where I can safely do this. If she's already having health issues, like that's something to consider. And was also kind of disappointed because I don't know if that was like making sense to him. Like, I understand like wanting to take your time, having kids, but like Marissa's not just like making this up just because she's like, I just like don't want to have birth control. I just want kids right now. Like,
yeah, he's very dismissive of her concerns in a way that comes across as very self-centered.
Yes.
And it's really hard to watch. And then the other thing that was kind of bizarre, but also very DC, possibly one of the most DC interactions in the show, is their political conversations about her past in the military, her experience there, and his inability to accept it, really.
Yes.
I was curious about whether or not they... like maybe all couples in every season have these kinds of conversations. They just don't show them because they don't feel like they are aligned with the community and audience. Whereas here they were like, oh, like DC wants to see these political conversations, which they're not wrong. I did want to see it. I was very intrigued. But my big takeaway from their conversations about that were kind of like, did they not discuss this in the pods? Like, it seems like such a big part of her life that she was proud of having served. And he seems very disgusted by any sort of military service. And I just don't get how they got to the point of being engaged without having parsed through that.
I think my theory is that like for a socialist, he feels very individualistic to me.
So true.
Like, which is just the vibe. Like, again, it's edited, but again, that's what I'm gathering. But something I noticed in the pods, like Marissa was very clear that she said, hey, I've dated across the spectrum. I've dated conservative. I've dated liberal. Marissa is very compromising, like not settling. I'd like to like make that very clear. But just like she seems like a person that's like, I'm open. I'll make it work. And that's also what those conversations seem to sound like. Whereas Ramses is like not as compromising. And both are okay in their own right, you know, but I think I'm really surprised on like Ramses's part in the pods that like he kind of didn't make that decision then, which is like to your point, because like he's saying being in the military is a foundational thing that I am against. Like that was your past, you know, like as long as you don't go back, you know, like it's fine. But Marissa raises really great questions about like, well, what about my kids? You know, or our kids, right? And even Marissa's point of just like, yeah, I'm not going to go back. But like when I walk around in Navy shit, you know, I want to show my kids like, hey, this is what mom used to do. And it's like not something to be ashamed of. So I think there might be more of a gray area than Ramses is like maybe
willing
allowing.
to allow. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's for this specific relationship. If he was dating somebody that never was in the military, also doesn't believe in the military, like if it's that foundational, like
maybe that's what he got to go do. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So in light of all that, obviously you mentioned that episode 11 left us on a cliffhanger with Marissa and Ramses. Do you think they're going to make it?
No. I don't think that. I think
hard no.
I do not think so.
And they
quickly.
shouldn't. Like,
they
if they do say yes, they're going to be in for a tough first year of marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if they say yes and they're really about it, Ramses has got to like interrogate a lot of things. Because I'm like, to me, I'm like, Marissa has compromised a lot. She's really trying to meet him where he's at. And like, I'm trying not to be biased because like I'm rooting for both of them. I want everybody on this show to find something happy and like be happy. But yeah, it's got to be a give and take. And right now I'm not seeing that.
Let's be real, lawsuits are not fun. But with Christopher Nace and the trial lawyers at Paulson and Nace, at least they're a little easier. Paulson and Nace is a DC law firm in every sense of the word. It was founded here in 1979. Partner Chris Nace is a local who cares deeply about the DC community, even serving on the board of the local branch of the Living Classrooms Foundation in his free time. Nace and his associates, Samantha Peters, John Reese, and Maya Perry, handle medical malpractice, wrongful death, and other complex injury cases. And they don't just settle every case. They'll go to court. They'll fight for you. Paulson and Nace has even been recognized as one of Best Lawyers' best law firms. So if you have been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Paulson and Nace for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.paulsonandnace.com or call 202-463-1999. Say goodbye to rent. Kite House, one of DC's best-selling condominiums, has an exciting new announcement. You can now own with no money down, thanks to a grant program to assist qualified buyers purchasing at Kite House. In addition to no money down, Kite House is offering interest rates buy-downs and new pricing. Kite House is part of the Parks at Walter Reed. It's a super walkable neighborhood with a Whole Foods, nail salon, and charmery, plus year-round festivals, markets, and exercise classes. One-bedroom pricing starts in the high 300,000s. 2 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms plus den are also available. There's an open house every Saturday and Sunday from 1 to 4. Visit www.kitehousedc.com/incentives for more information or to schedule your tour.
Another couple that I think really struggled with give and take, it's got to be Nick and Hannah.
Let's get into that. I
feel like neither of them come off well.
No.
Like, at the end of the day, Nick seems like a child, can't make pasta.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to know anything about financial literacy.
Yeah.
Lives with his parents.
Yeah.
And, like, doesn't seem to have any motivation to move out of that situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Hannah is mean.
It's really
so mean to him. The line where she said something like, "You'll get treated like an equal when you contribute like an equal," I gasped.
Oh, yeah. I gasped
Yikes.
too. And that was like right after, because I think that was when they were like doing the indoor climbing and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was right after she was roasting him again for just being himself. And she's just like, "Oh, you're giving me the ick again." I think she called him Icky Nicky.
She did.
At one point.
Terrible.
I was like, oh no, not the Fairly Odd Parents Icky Vicky reference. That's what. If you want to talk about childish, come on now.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's interesting because Nick and Hannah, like, you're 100% right. Like, Nick is coming from a place, he's 28, like, there's some development things that need to go on. But I think Hannah is, like, she's admitting that she can be a little bit judgmental, but I don't think she's admitting that that's a place where she really needs to grow. Like, they both need to grow
Right.
in two very different ways. But yeah, so I guess, like, that context of them going back and forth throughout these past few episodes, like, you could see it deteriorating further and further. And it hits a breaking point, I guess, at the Flapper party, the 20s party.
At Crown and Crow, which is a bar that I do love.
Yes. I was just like, also, it looked really good. Like, again, we've already talked about the locations, but I'm just like, everything looks so good. Like,
yeah, they really sold DC as a place to hang.
They did. And it is a place to hang. Like, if you don't
truly.
live here, come live here, you know? It's great. I actually forgot this in the pods, probably because it was so short-lived.
It was very, very minor.
Yes, very minor. But Nick D admits before they go to the party, hey, Hannah, you know, the only person that I was also intrigued with in the pods was Katie. And for context, Katie, like, worked for the Baltimore Ravens. She was, like, really into football. He was really into football. That was what they had in common. And so he was just like, yeah, I just probably going to want to catch up with her and say hi to her and just understand what happened. And so he goes and talks to Katie at the party. And Hannah is sitting, like, at the bar with Monica just watching the whole thing go down. And apparently Katie and Nick talked for, like, 40 minutes. And it's an interesting conversation. Like, I'll admit, Nick is flirting a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. Like, which, you know, with context of, like, all the stuff that had been going on in their relationship, it did not seem very solid.
To put it mildly.
But Katie, I feel like, and maybe this is, like, Katie's maturity, you know, she rounds it out. I was watching the show with my younger brother, and he told me, he was like, you know, Hannah's interaction with Nick feels like chaotic evil, whereas, like, Katie's interaction is chaotic good. Not to say that either are evil or good, but just, like, the energy.
Just the way they're, yeah.
Yes, and the dynamic, because he was like, Katie said the exact same things that Hannah has been saying to Nick all along, of just like, you're kind of immature. It seems like you have a mask using this Rico Suave, like, persona, but she's saying it in a kinder way, and also had the maturity to recognize that's not going to work for me, like, and that's not going to work for you. And it says a lot. Like, I think that might have been something helpful that helped to click for him, compounded with when they came back from
and Hannah is upset that her best friend in the whole world, Katie, had this conversation with Nick.
Which they haven't met before the pods, or at least the only...
No.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a lot of alcohol at play in that statement, yes.
1,000%. 1,000%. But she was lighting into Nick, and I wrote in my notes, like, when that conversation was happening with Nick and Katie, I was like, Hannah is going to rip him apart when they get home.
And she did.
She did. And then the conversation ended with, okay, she just, like, shut it down. She's like, all right, let's go to bed.
And the next thing we know, she's not showing up to try on her wedding dress, and they're ending it. I mean, bottom line is Hannah has her shit together. She's got her life together. And if she wants to be with someone who's like that, more power to her. You know, I get it. It would be really hard to be with someone that you had to train on every aspect of adult living. I think that she could have handled things more kindly throughout, but I'm glad that they at least came to the conclusion that this was not the right choice for them before they got to the actual wedding. Yeah.
I actually read a profile, like, I think it was the Washingtonian, they interviewed Nick D, because I was just like, how's he doing? I was like, how's it going? And I will say, like, something that I thought was very sweet was when they did some rapid fire questions with him at the end, they asked him, like, Hannah, like, what do you have to say about Hannah? And he said, could I use, like, 3 or 4 words? And they're like, yeah, sure. And he said, she's beautiful inside and out.
Oh.
And also with everything that happened with Monica and Steven, which y'all should listen to the last Love is Blind episode at CityCast. It was very good.
Thank you. Yeah, we interviewed Monica for context about all of the drama that happened with her and Steven. So we won't get into it today, just go listen to that last episode. But yes, thank you. It was a very good interview.
Very great. I've just noticed a lot of the contestants have been very gracious, like even when things have ended, and Nick is no exception. I didn't get to hear Hannah's perspective, but I'm sure it will probably be similar. So if you guys are stressed and worried about either of them, they are okay. Also, Nick D has moved out of his house and he lives in Tyson's Corner now. That's also what I learned.
Good for him.
Yeah,
Growing up.
so he's grown up. You know, he'd learned from the experience, and that says a lot. That says a lot.
To your point about people being gracious, like I do think that in this season we've seen people be more diplomatic, more like grounded than in previous seasons. I'm curious to see if that's the way it's going to be at reunion as well. It would be very DC, you know?
Yes.
Like this is a place where it's a small enough city that you run into people all the time. You have to be able to keep your cool, and a lot of people work in politics.
Yeah. Like I felt like that was very reflective. And like I will say sometimes that diplomacy and that tolerance can be, maybe from my perspective, a little too much, because some of these reveals, I don't know how you could be calm. Like, and I'm thinking about Tyler and Ashley and the reveal.
Oh my gosh, yes, the kids. Let us talk about Tyler and Ashley. I'm very confused about what's happening here because what we saw in the show is different from what's happening online. So do you want to just summarize what we saw in the show about their kids or his kids?
Yes. For Tyler and Ashley on screen, Tyler reveals to Ashley that he actually has 3 kids. And for context, for the whole show, he has been talking about having like 7 babies, 4 babies, like all this babies. He's like, we're going to have so many babies. We're going to have so many kids. I want to name my kids and all this stuff. And then Ashley finds out he has already had 3 children that he did not disclose in the pods. And so what she's super confused about is this seems like really important. Why wouldn't you just mention it in the pods itself? And so his explanation is that like he was a sperm donor. He was trying to help a couple, which I think later on in this drop of episodes, he says it was like a queer couple, a gay couple. And that like he doesn't have any involvement with the kids.
He's like, they don't even know what I look like, I don't think.
Yeah, Ashley like point blank asked him like, do they know what you look like? He's like, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't
confusing.
think so. Yeah, and so he's posing this as just like I was just a sperm donor, which by the way, there's a lot of like ethics conversations about like being a sperm donor and not being anonymous. You know what I mean? You know, why couldn't like folks go to a sperm bank, and like those like nuances aren't shown on screen. But that's the narrative that Tyler is sharing. They end up getting over it. Like Ashley is very hurt because that is
because she feels blindsided. Yeah.
Yeah. Love is blindsided.
Love is blindsided.
Love is blindsided. That's what the season is.
That's what the whole show should be called. Yeah.
Yeah. And understandably so, because like whether there's involvement or not, like that's big. Like, and it seems like something very normal, I think, to share. They're sharing everything. You know, we've already had a lot of trauma conversations in the pods. So it's odd not to bring that up early on and like a few weeks before the wedding. So they resolve it, you know, they're like back together. But now as the show has been released.
Yeah. Very different narrative playing out online.
Very, very different narrative. And now, can't believe everything you read and hear online, unless you're listening to CityCast. But, but the woman that like he donated sperm to,
heavy air quotes.
Yes, in air quotes, has like come out on Instagram and said like, you know, this whole sperm donor narrative, that's not the real story here.
Yeah.
That's not what's going on. I've seen lots of clips on TikTok where there have been like pictures, like time-stamped pictures with him with his kids, like as infants, at least. I haven't seen any where they're older. I don't know how old they are, which for context, he has 2 twin girls and a boy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And basically the mom's saying that Tyler was very involved in the kids' lives up until he decides to go on the show. And then he like scrubbed his social media entirely of any evidence of the kids. So got to be clear, we do not know if this is true, but it's just a completely different story from what he shares on the show. So I'm very excited for the reunion to come out, for us to be able to learn more about what's happening here because it makes no sense.
I
One
am
of
as
these
well.
things is one of these people is lying, you know?
Yeah. And for anybody who hasn't watched like Love is Blind before, I will say I'm hoping that Nick and Vanessa get some training on how to ask hard questions. Because every time they have a reunion, they always skirt the really tough stuff. And I'm like, this season, I was like, you need to go right for the jugular on this one. Because this is crazy. This is crazy. I was literally like, had like the Tyra Banks meme in my head where she's like, we were rooting for you. We were all rooting for you, which like, earlier we thought that they were going to be the couple that really made it. Yeah, like the couple. He seems like he really loves her.
Yeah.
But that is like a foundational thing that is like, I mean, not even foundational. I don't even know how to describe it. That's insane. That is insane.
Based on the show, like the show narrative, I do still think that they will say yes, but I'm curious to see if they're still together a year after. So another couple we should talk about, one that definitely does not make it, Alex and Tim. I don't really know if there's all that much to say about them because frankly, not to be mean, but they felt like the most boring of the couples to me anyway.
Yeah.
Basically, their communication styles have always been very different, and it really comes to a head in this season where he says that she was not, like effusive enough and warm enough while meeting his parents. He was upset that she went to take a nap the second the cameras went away. Just, not a good look if true. Also a funny thing to call her on, I think.
Yeah.
It just really came to a head very fast.
Yeah, very fast. Was it very fast or was it going to happen all along? Because it came to a head on the second day in Cabo.
That's
when
true.
they like it came to a head and like, which, in the context of the scenario with his parents, it jumped so quickly, which maybe is also the editing, I'm not sure. But they had this disagreement in Cabo as well. He was ready to end it. When Tim and Alex were on their, I guess, pre-honeymoons, since they weren't married yet, they're engaged, in Mexico, like on the second night or something, like we get dropped in the drama and like have no context. And we see this conversation between Tim and Alex where Tim was like, oh yeah, I like needed to pack up my stuff and walk out because you weren't letting me talk. Like it seemed like Alex had covered his mouth, all of this stuff. And then fast forward to now, they're having not the exact same disagreement, but I think the foundation of the issue is the same. Tim's belief of like what his wife and partnership should look like is very rigid, like not, and even like in a bad way, but just like, he has the expectation, like when he asked for Alex's hand in marriage, like he like had written this letter for her father and like, he was very rooted and like anchored, I feel like, in the loss of like his older sisters. And so like his expectation for his future wife was like, you're coming into my family as like, a future
another daughter for my parents.
Yeah, for my parents, which like, again, a lot of pressure, a lot to unpack there. But like he's open about that's what he wants. Whereas Alex is a little more laid back. And I think we discussed this a couple weeks ago, like where we weren't really getting a sense of what she wants out of a husband, like either. And I think because of that, like it seems like even more stark that this fight is like happening because Tim is very clear about like how he wants to communicate what he wants. He was very upset, like you were saying, with Alex falling asleep after his parents had driven like, it was 10 hours, I think.
Oh God, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah. Which like, honestly, that's a very fair argument. But when I was watching it, I was like, this is weirdly actually a very normal argument to have in a relationship that's, I think, is pretty resolvable when you have a foundation and an understanding of each other, which they just don't. Like, the summary of it is he literally said to her, like, I do not see you as someone who could be my wife. And that's heavy paraphrasing here. He said it in a more dramatic, poetic way that had me gagged. I was like, oh my God. I was like, I don't know if I should be watching this. I was like, this is really
It felt
intense.
it felt like a really intimate moment to see. But yeah, I think it's good that they learned this early. In general, I've been like proud of the DC season because of so many couples realizing that this isn't for them before they get to the aisle. So at this point, we basically have Ashley and Tyler going to the wedding. Marissa and Ramses, we think they're going to be a no. And then Garrett and Taylor, who we haven't really talked about because there isn't really much to say. I mean, they had a slight little hiccup where he got a text from an ex and didn't tell Taylor about it in the most upfront or clear way. But it really did seem like a miscommunication. And it really did seem like he did his best to like shut down the ex that was sliding into his DMs, and he just like didn't tell the story in like as timely a fashion as Taylor would have liked, and he like messed up the details the first time around. But they seem to have worked through it. They had like a lot of things they had to work through. She wants to move to San Diego. His family's in Fredericksburg, so he wants to stay in the area, but they seem to have managed to talked through that, and it seems like they agreed to at some point move to San Diego closer to her family. I am pro team Garrett and Taylor, if for no other reason than that they seem like the most DC couple of them all. Like they're transplants, or she at least is a transplant. She seems to live in an English basement in Shaw. They both work on the Hill. Like, gotta root for the DC couple.
Yeah, no, they are very... And I always put stars around it. I was just like, especially like when she was meeting his family and they were like, so where'd you go to school? Oh, Johns Hopkins. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, this is like very DC, very DMV. I'm surprised that she wanted to go back to San Diego because she seems like she really fits in like in DC super well, but her whole family's there. So I get it. But I also understand why she moved here in the first place. Because I wouldn't be surprised if she was like, yeah, I grew up like in the area. I was like, no, Girl was made for DC. Yes, 1,000%. 1,000%.
Well, one last thing before we close off for the day. Washingtonian's Daniela Bick wrote up a recap of the most recent drop of episodes, and she ended with the question, what if each season had a local host? Who do you think it would have to be?
Okay. It's like so hard for me to narrow down because like I'm like going through the list in my head. I think I've got a little bit of a bias because like I used to work at WMU, like at a radio. And would it make any sense? No. Would it be the funniest thing you've ever heard? Yes. Kojo Namdi.
Oh my God.
From the Politics Hour.
Kojo would be amazing.
I think that Nick and Vanessa should listen to some Kojo episodes and take some notes because he will ask the tough questions and will not be moved. So like, I would like to see him host a reunion. That is what I want.
That would be hilarious. I was going to throw up our host, Bridget. I think
she would be great.
She'd be so good. She's a reality TV aficionado and also just like so good at asking the tough questions in a kind way.
Yeah.
So I think Kojo and Bridget together hosting reunion. Let's get on it.
Be so funny. It would be so funny. The juxtaposition would be so hilarious to me.
Truly. We will be right back here after the reunion comes out in 2 weeks. So we're going to skip episode 12, which is going to be the actual weddings, and then we'll just talk about it all at once. Aja, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And listeners, a reminder that our fall campaign is underway. Become a CityCast DC member and get both good feelings and great perks. Go to membership.citycast.fm right now to join. And if you're already a member, thank you so much for your support. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, tell that friend of yours who binged Love is Blind this weekend. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.